The cab driver checked the rearview mirror 3 times before we reached Sycamore Street. Not because of me, because of the silence. Most people coming home for Christmas talked too much. They called relatives, complained about delayed flights, asked where to get decent coffee around O'Hare. I spent the whole 40-minute ride staring at wet salt stains on the highway barriers, while my duffel bag leaned against my knee like a tired dog. December 23rd, 4:15 p.m. The driver finally cleared his throat near the subdivision entrance. "You military?" I looked down at the faded olive drab bag between my boots. "Army Corps of Engineers." He nodded slowly like that explained something important. "My nephew did 6 months in Qatar," he said. "Came home weird for a while, kept sleeping with the lights on." I almost smiled at that. "Smart mans," I said. The neighborhood looked exactly the same at first glance. Big brick houses, decorative wreaths hanging from oversized windows, inflatable snowmen collapsing sideways on frozen lawns because somebody got lazy with the extension cords. Oakbrook always tried very hard to look expensive, without technically becoming rich. The air smelled like wet pine needles and chimney smoke. Snow clouds were stacking low over the rooftops. Every house glowed gold and soft behind curtains except one. Mine. The driver slowed down in front of the property and checked the address twice. "You sure this is it?" I didn't answer right away. The mailbox was gone, not replaced. Gone. For 26 years, there'd been an ugly, rusted mailbox Arthur Vance built himself after some teenager smashed the old one during Halloween in 1998. My grandfather welded the replacement in his garage and painted it dark green because he said black paint made people drive too fast at night. Now there was just frozen dirt beside the curb, and the signs, pending sale. The reflective letters caught the headlights from passing cars and flashed silver against the dark lawn. For a second, I honestly thought the cab driver had dropped me at the wrong house. Then I saw the front porch railing. Arthur built that too, crooked on the left side because he refused to measure anything twice. My chest tightened a little. Not dramatic, not movie-style panic. Just the quiet feeling of your stomach missing a step. The house was completely dark. No Christmas tree, no kitchen light, no terrible holiday jazz playlist blasting from my mother's Bluetooth speaker. Eleanor Vance treated December like an Olympic event. By Thanksgiving, she usually had 3 themed wreaths, 2 matching nutcracker sets, and enough cinnamon candles to suffocate a horse. But the windows were black, empty. The driver turned halfway around in his seat. "You want me to wait?" I kept staring at the sign. "No," I said finally. "I'm good." That was a lie worth about $4.70. He unloaded my duffel bag onto the curb beside 2 thin patches of frozen grass. The meter read $83.42. I tipped him $20 because Kuwait had taught me airports make everybody slightly miserable. Before he left, he looked at the house again. "Hell of a time to move," he muttered. Then he drove off. I stood there alone while Christmas lights blinked across the rest of the street, like the neighborhood was pretending not to notice me. The wind cut straight through my jacket. I walked up the driveway slowly. My boots already knew where the cracks were in the concrete. 3rd slab tilted slightly right after heavy rain. Arthur used to joke the driveway had combat injuries. The porch smelled wrong. No cedar. No coffee. No trace of my grandfather's pipe tobacco buried deep in the wood grain. Just cold paint. I tried the front door out of instinct. Locked. That part hurt more than I expected. Not because I couldn't get inside. Because nobody had told me. 11 months overseas. 14-hour workdays rebuilding flood barriers and temporary infrastructure. Spotty Wi-Fi. Sand inside every zipper I owned. And somehow my family forgot to mention they were selling the house my grandfather built with his own hands. Nice. I stepped back from the porch and noticed something else through the front window. Different furniture. The old plaid recliner was gone. Arthur's oak bookshelf too. In their place sat beige staging furniture that looked like it came from a catalog called Divorce and Chardonnay. That's when the truth finally landed. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't, we were thinking about downsizing. This was already happening. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked my messages again, even though I already knew what I'd find. Nothing from my mother since December 11th. Her last text. "Christmas might be quiet this year. Money's tight after Chloe's wedding. We'll celebrate properly when you're home safe." I stared at that message while standing in front of a nearly sold house worth somewhere around $800,000. Money's tight. Sure. Across the street, old Mr. Donnelly opened his garage halfway before spotting me. His face went pale so fast, I almost laughed. There it is, I thought. The neighborhood knows. He lifted one awkward hand, like a man caught walking into the wrong funeral. Harper, he called carefully. Didn't know you were back already. Neither did my family, apparently. His mouth opened, closed again. That told me everything I needed. People love gossip right up until they accidentally meet the victim. I thought maybe. He glanced at the sign. Well, I figured Eleanor explained things, clearly. An uncomfortable silence settled between us. Finally, he rubbed the back of his neck. Your mother said you signed off on it from overseas. I looked back at the dark house. Snow started falling lightly across the yard, tiny dry flakes catching in the porch light from next door. No, I said quietly, I definitely didn't. Mr. Donnelly looked genuinely sick after that. Good. Not because I wanted him embarrassed, because it confirmed something important. This wasn't confusion. Somebody lied. I picked up my duffel bag again and walked back toward the curb before the conversation could turn into sympathy. I wasn't ready for sympathy yet. Sympathy makes things real too fast. The motel off Interstate 88 charged $65 a night and smelled faintly like bleach and burned coffee grounds. Perfect. I dropped the bag beside the bed, sat down, and stared at the wall heater rattling under the window. Then I pulled my laptop from the duffel bag. If my family wanted to turn my homecoming into a business transaction, fine. I knew how to read paperwork better than they did. Have you ever come home to people who acted like your absence gave them permission to erase you? And if you were Harper standing in that snow-covered driveway, would you protect the family name or yourself? Comment below and subscribe if you believe respect means more than appearances. I plugged the Ethernet cable into my laptop before I even took off my boots. Old habits. People think military logistics is trucks and cargo manifests. Mostly, it's paperwork, timestamps, and learning how to notice when somebody's story doesn't line up with the numbers. The motel Wi-Fi was garbage, so I used a secure hotspot puck from my deployment kit and waited while the encrypted system booted up across the screen. Outside, snow drifted sideways through the parking lot under flickering neon lights. Somewhere upstairs, a couple argued about somebody named Travis, while a toilet kept running through the wall like a dying engine. Honestly, the motel felt more emotionally stable than my family. I opened the DuPage County property portal first. Parcel records don't care about feelings. That's why I like them. The address on Sycamore Street pulled up immediately. Property tax history, assessed value, permit records. Then I saw the listing status, active under contract. List price $845,000. I leaned back slowly in the chair. Not because of the money. Arthur's house probably was worth that much now. Oakbrook property prices had become completely detached from reality. Around the same time, people started paying $14 for bottled water with cucumber slices floating inside. What bothered me was the timeline. Listing date, November 18th. I was still overseas. The first showing had happened on November 22nd, Thanksgiving week. The same week, my mother told me over video chat that they were keeping things simple this year, because Chloe and her husband were struggling financially after the wedding. I remembered the exact conversation because Chloe spent half of it fake crying about inflation while wearing a Cartier bracelet. Funny how hardship always looks softer under designer lighting. I clicked deeper into the records. The realtor's name appeared next. Julian Hayes. Hayes Luxury Residential Group. I searched the brokerage website and found his headshot immediately. Mid-40s. Perfect haircut. Teeth so white they probably had their own tax bracket. Under his bio, specializing in discreet, high-value suburban transitions. That phrase alone made me want to drink antifreeze. The listing photos loaded one by one after that. I stared at them for a long time. The living room, the kitchen, Arthur's workshop, gone. Every trace of him had been stripped out and replaced with staged furniture that looked like nobody had ever sat on it voluntarily. The old oak dining table disappeared too. That table weighed 300 pounds and survived 2 basement floods, 1 kitchen fire, and a failed attempt by my cousin Randy to turn it into a beer pong surface in 2009. Now there was a white marble table sitting in its place with a bowl of decorative pears. Decorative pears. That's how you know rich people have lost touch with God. I zoomed into one photo carefully, the fireplace mantel. My throat tightened. Arthur's military shadow box was missing, the folded flag from his funeral, his Vietnam ribbons, the black and white photograph of him standing beside a mud-covered helicopter in 1971, all erased for staging photos. I rubbed my eyes hard once and forced myself back into work mode. Emotion later. Information first. I opened social media next. My mother used Facebook like it was a state-approved propaganda outlet. Chloe preferred Instagram because she liked strangers envying her. Sure enough, Chloe had posted 3 hours earlier. The location tag read, Blackstone Ridge Ski Lodge, Lake Geneva area, 40 miles north. The video auto-played silently. Chloe sat beside a massive stone fireplace wearing a white sweater that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. Her husband Grant held up a mug of spiced cider while somebody off-camera laughed. Then my mother's voice drifted into frame. Make sure you get the Christmas tree behind us. I paused the video. Christmas tree. Interesting. According to Eleanor Vance 2 weeks ago, Christmas had basically been canceled due to financial strain. Apparently, financial strain now included luxury ski resorts and catered charcuterie boards. I checked the lodge website. Rooms start at $690 a night during holiday weekends. God bless transparency. Another post appeared 20 minutes later. This one from my mother. Family is everything. Underneath it sat a photo of Chloe and Grant kissing beside the fireplace. No mention of me. No waiting for Harper to come home. Nothing. It looked less like a family Christmas and more like they'd already edited me out of the brochure. I should have been furious by then. Anger is messy. Anger burns fuel too fast. What I felt instead was colder than that. Clarity. Every click built the same picture. My deployment schedule had given them an empty runway. They knew exactly when I'd land. Exactly when I'd lose military internet access during transit. Exactly how long they had before I physically reached Oakbrook. This wasn't panic selling. This was coordination. I pulled out a notepad and started building a timeline across the motel desk. November 18th, house listed. November 22nd, first showing. December 2nd, staging company invoice filed. December 11th, Eleanor sends money's tight text. December 23rd, I arrived to find pending sale sign. The betrayal looked almost professional once organized properly. Like a business plan. I sat there staring at the notes while the heater rattled beside the window. Then another memory surfaced. 3 years earlier, Arthur standing in his garage wearing that stained green flannel jacket he refused to throw away. You know why bridges fail, Harper? I remembered shrugging while helping him sort bolts into coffee cans. Cheap materials? No. He pointed at me with a wrench, because somebody ignores stress fractures too long. At the time, I thought he was talking about engineering. Now I wasn't so sure. My phone buzzed suddenly against the desk. Mom calling. I watched the screen light up with her contact photo. Eleanor smiling at Chloe's bridal shower while pretending calories didn't apply to champagne. The phone rang 6 times. I didn't answer. A voicemail notification appeared seconds later. Then another text. Harper, honey, call me when you land safely. I actually laughed at that. Not loud, just enough to hear how tired it sounded. I looked around the motel room. Cheap curtains, burn mark on the carpet near the heater. Half-broken ice bucket beside the television. Meanwhile, my family was 40 miles away drinking cider in matching holiday sweaters while trying to quietly liquidate my grandfather's house behind my back. That contrast told me more about them than any argument ever could. I closed the laptop slowly and stared at the snow outside. People always think betrayal arrives screaming. Sometimes it arrives organized, neatly formatted. Signed in blue ink, I let the voicemail sit unheard while I unzipped the bottom compartment of my duffel bag. That compartment carried the things I didn't trust anywhere else. Extra passport copies. Emergency cash sealed in waterproof plastic. Medical records. A folding knife I forgot to declare twice in Kuwait and somehow never got caught with. And the compass. The brass surface caught the motel lamp in dull gold when I lifted it out, heavy, cold. Scratched near the edge where Arthur dropped it onto concrete sometime around the Carter administration. 1972. The date was still engraved clearly across the back. Wrapped around the compass sat a folded piece of brittle paper secured with a faded rubber band that looked one stretch away from retirement. I stared at it for a second before carefully peeling it loose. The original deed, not a copy, not a scan, the actual county-stamped survivorship deed. Arthur handed me 3 years earlier in his garage, while my mother was inside arguing with a landscaper about hydrangeas. Funny timing now that I think about it. Back then, I didn't fully understand why he wanted secrecy around it. I thought maybe he was just old-fashioned. Suspicious. One of those Vietnam veterans who stored paperwork in coffee cans because trusting banks felt too optimistic. Turns out the man simply knew his children. I unfolded the document slowly across my lap. The paper smelled faintly like dust and motor oil. Arthur always smelled like one or the other. My thumb traced the signature near the bottom. Arthur Vance Sr., the handwriting shook harder toward the final letters. Parkinson's had already started getting worse by then, though he pretended it was just bad coffee and worse politicians. I swallowed hard once. The motel heater rattled again beside the window while snow drifted thicker outside. Somewhere in the parking lot, somebody started a pickup truck that sounded medically unwell. For a few minutes, I just sat there holding the deed and thinking about the last real conversation Arthur and I ever had. Not the hospital one, the garage one, 3 summers ago, July heat. Cubs game playing on a tiny radio near his workbench while he rebuilt an ancient lawnmower for absolutely no reason. I remembered wiping sweat from my neck while he slid the envelope across the table toward me. "What's this?" "Insurance," he said. I opened it halfway and frowned. "Grandpa, don't argue yet. Read first." The legal wording barely made sense to me back then. Joint tenancy. Rights of survivorship, transfer upon death. I looked up at him. "You're putting me on the deed? You already pay the property taxes, half the damn time anyway. That's not the point." He leaned back on the stool and took a slow sip from a chipped White Sox mug. "Your mother thinks houses are status symbols," he said. "You treat them like homes. Big difference." I remember laughing awkwardly because I honestly thought he was exaggerating. Arthur snorted. "Kid, your sister would sex cult this place tomorrow if somebody promised her a country club membership and valet parking." At the time it sounded harsh. Now it sounded predictive. Back in the motel room, I rubbed my thumb across the county seal embossed near the bottom of the paper. Everything suddenly clicked together in a way that made my stomach feel strangely hollow. My mother hadn't accidentally ignored my deployment return date. She isolated it. Because legally, I was the problem. Not emotionally, not morally. Legally, if I stayed overseas long enough, they could push the sale through before I physically showed up to challenge anything, especially if they convinced people I already approved it. That explained Mr. Donnelly's reaction. That explained the silence. That explained why Eleanor suddenly became so interested in texting me things like "stay safe, honey, and don't stress about home stuff." While I was sleeping in desert barracks surrounded by concrete barriers, she wasn't comforting me, she was managing me. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees and laughed quietly into one hand. Not because it was funny, because once you finally see the full scam, part of your brain almost respects the organization. Almost. The compass sat heavy beside me on the bedspread. Arthur gave me that too after my first deployment. "Every soldier needs something built before GPS batteries die," he said. "The Army has satellites. The Army also once spent $400 on a hammer." Fair point. I picked up the compass again and rotated the lid open with my thumb. The needle steadied itself almost immediately. North. Simple, certain. Arthur loved simple things. Black coffee, cheap wool jackets, small-town hardware stores where employees' A's actually knew what aisle screws belonged in. He hated performance. That's probably why Eleanor embarrassed him in public without even noticing. My mother believed appearances fixed reality. Arthur believed reality showed up whether you invited it or not. Growing up between those two philosophies felt like being raised by opposing governments. I glanced at the staged listing photos still glowing on my laptop screen. White blankets, fake candles, decorative pears from hell. They erased him fast. That part bothered me more than the sale itself. Not because objects mattered so much. Arthur wasn't trapped inside a dining table like some Disney ghost. But every item they removed told the same story. They wanted the house to look expensive, not lived in. There's a difference. One makes people comfortable. The other makes them nervous about touching coasters. I folded the deed carefully and wrapped it back around the compass. Then I stopped. No, not yet. I unfolded it again and read the final paragraph slowly under the motel lamp. "In the event of death, full ownership shall transfer immediately and without contest to surviving joint tenant Harper Elaine Vance." Without contest. Arthur chose those words carefully. The old man spent his entire life avoiding unnecessary drama, but when he finally decided to protect something, he did it with concrete. And suddenly, I understood the real weight of what sat in my hands. He hadn't just given me property. He gave me protection from the people most likely to misuse love against me. That realization hurt worse than the pending sale sign, because good grandparents don't prepare you for strangers. They prepare you for family. I looked down at the compass one more time before sliding both items back into the duffel bag. Outside, the snow kept falling over Oakbrook. quiet, steady, covering everything evenly whether it deserved it or not. I left the motel at 7:12 the next morning wearing faded jeans, a gray sweater, and the kind of winter jacket nobody remembers 5 seconds after seeing. That was intentional. Uniforms attract attention. Ordinary people disappear. The roads through Oakbrook were coated in thin gray slush from overnight snow. Salt trucks had already been through once, leaving white crust along the curbs, like the entire town had been dipped in powdered sugar and disappointment. I stopped for coffee at a gas station near Route 83. The cashier looked about 19 and deeply betrayed by existence. "Medium?" she asked. "Yeah." "Cream?" "Sure." She handed me the cup without eye contact. "Merry Christmas." The way she said it sounded legally required. I respected that. By 8:03, I was parked 2 blocks away from Sycamore Street, beside a row of bare maple trees. Julian Hayes' website listed the final buyer walkthrough at 8:30 before closing paperwork, scheduled the following morning. Efficient. Illegal. But efficient. The neighborhood looked cleaner during daylight. More polished. The fresh snow softened everything just enough to hide the cracks in sidewalks and marriages. I sat in the truck for a minute watching my childhood home through the windshield. Arthur always said winter tells the truth about houses. Summer hides problems behind flowers. Winter forces everything into the open. Bad insulation, weak pipes, roof damage, foundations shifting under pressure. Families aren't much different. I killed the engine and walked the rest of the way. The cold air bit hard against my face. My boots crunched softly across packed snow while Christmas decorations blinked from neighboring porches. Somebody nearby was making bacon. Another house had Bing Crosby drifting faintly through the walls. Normal Christmas sounds. Meanwhile, my family was inside staging a property theft with catered cookies. America really is a beautiful country. I crossed the street slowly and circled behind the property instead of using the driveway. Not sneaking exactly, just observing. The backyard fence gate hung slightly crooked where Arthur once backed the riding mower into it after 2 beers and an argument with a raccoon. Still crooked. Good. That detail grounded me more than I expected. The patio door stood partially open, while movers carried out empty storage bins from the garage. Through the glass, I could already hear Chloe's voice bouncing through the kitchen. "Oh my God, the natural light in here basically sells itself. Natural light." That kitchen had one tiny window over the sink for 30 years until Arthur expanded it himself during the recession, because contractors quoted him $12,000 and insulted his intelligence in the same conversation. Now Chloe talked about it like she personally invented sunlight. I stepped quietly onto the patio and slipped inside behind a middle-aged couple wearing matching wool coats. Nobody stopped me. That's the funny thing about confidence. If you walk slowly and look mildly irritated, wealthy people assume you belong there. The house smelled wrong again. Vanilla candles, fresh paint, synthetic pine spray pumped through hidden diffusers near the hallway outlets. Arthur's house used to smell like coffee, sawdust, and whatever soup recipe he forgot simmering too long. Now it smelled like a bank lobby trying to flirt. A group of buyers stood around the living room while Julian Hayes gave his presentation with the smooth confidence of a man who'd never once assembled his own furniture. "As you can see," he said, "the owners invested heavily in tasteful modernization while preserving the home's authentic character." Authentic character. I nearly choked on my coffee. The authentic character used to include a giant dent in the hallway wall from where I crashed into it carrying hockey gear at 13. Funny how staging companies never preserve those details. I moved quietly toward the dining room. The fake marble table sat directly under the chandelier now. White flowers, gold napkin rings, decorative candles nobody lights because they cost $70 each. Arthur Hand's carved oak table was gone. That hit harder in person. He built that table over 8 months after retiring from the machine shop. Refused to use power tools except the bandsaw because real craftsmanship shouldn't sound like a leaf blower. Every birthday, every funeral, every awkward family argument happened around that table. Now strangers admired imported centerpiece bowls on top of empty space. I looked down at the hardwood floor and noticed fresh scratches near the wall. They dragged it out fast. Probably didn't even use furniture pads. My jaw tightened briefly before I forced it loose again. Stay calm. Information first, emotion later. Voices drifted from the kitchen island. Eleanor, Chloe, laughing. I stepped closer without announcing myself. My mother stood beside a tray of catered pastries, wearing cream-colored wool and pearl earrings, like she was campaigning for public office. Chloe leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone, while Grant hovered nearby, pretending not to look nervous. He failed. Grant Sutton always looked nervous around money, which made sense considering he worked in luxury brand consulting, a profession that sounded fictional even before the economy had collapsed every 6 years. A young couple asked about the neighborhood schools. "Oh, they're wonderful," Eleanor said smoothly. "Very private, very quiet." That part was true. Oakbrook specialized in polite judgment. Another buyer gestured toward the fireplace. "Was this custom stonework?" My mother smiled proudly. "My husband handled that renovation himself." Interesting revisionist history. Thomas Vance once called contractors to replace a smoke detector battery because he didn't trust ladders. Arthur built the fireplace. Thomas mostly supervised from safe emotional distances. Julian continued guiding people through the house while Chloe pointed toward the staircase. The upstairs guest room became kind of pointless after my sister stopped coming home. I froze. Not visibly, just internally. The buyer nodded sympathetically. "Oh, families drift apart." Chloe sighed dramatically. "Military life changes people." There it was. Clean, simple, convenient. Not Harper deployed overseas supporting infrastructure operations. Not Harper sending money home after Arthur's medical bills piled up. Just estranged sister. Easier to sell that version. I watched my mother nod along without hesitation, while sipping coffee from a catered holiday cup. That hurt more than the pending sale sign. Not because strangers believed it, because she made it sound rehearsed. A little girl wandered past me then, maybe 7 years old, holding one of the fake decorative pine cones from the mantel. "Mom," she whispered loudly, "this house feels sad." Her mother looked horrified. I almost smiled into my coffee cup. Kids notice things adults spend fortunes ignoring. Julian clapped his hands lightly to gather attention. "Before we finish, let's take one final look at the patio access and backyard sightlines." The crowd shifted toward the rear hallway. I stayed behind near the living room window. From there, I could see almost the entire house at once. My mother laughing politely. Chloe fixing her hair in the reflection of the microwave. Grant checking his banking app when nobody watched. Strangers discussing square footage inside a house built by a man whose funeral flag had probably been shoved into a storage unit somewhere. And standing there quietly in the middle of it all, I realized something strange. I didn't feel invisible anymore. I felt patient. There's a difference. Invisible people disappear. Patient people wait for the right moment to speak. I stayed near the kitchen island after the buyers moved toward the patio. Nobody noticed me standing there. Again, that wasn't an accident. People only truly see what fits their version of reality. And according to my family's carefully curated little performance, I was somewhere overseas being distant and difficult while they bravely handled adult responsibilities. Amazing what wealthy suburbs can accomplish with enough beige sweaters and fake concern. Julian Hayes returned from the backyard carrying the energy of a man already calculating his commission check. "These sightlines are fantastic during summer," he told a couple near the sink. "You really get a resort-style atmosphere back there." Resort-style atmosphere. Arthur once grilled hot dogs in that backyard wearing socks with sandals while yelling at Cubs games through a portable radio duct-tapped to a lawn chair. Different definitions, I guess. Chloe leaned casually against the counter beside a tray of untouched cranberry pastries. Her wedding ring flashed every time she lifted her coffee cup. Big diamond. Bigger debt. "You honestly forget how huge this house is until you walk through it again," she said. A buyer smiled politely. "So why sell?" There it was, the real question. Chloe exchanged a quick glance with my mother before sighing softly like an actress preparing for a hospital scene on cable television. "Well," she began carefully, "it's just too much house for our family now. Not our family, their family." Interesting wording. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and lowered her voice slightly. "My sister hasn't really been around in years anyway." I stared at the backsplash tile behind her head instead of directly at her face. Control the reaction. Let them keep talking. Military briefings taught me something important. Silence makes dishonest people nervous. Nervous people fill space. And when they fill space long enough, they eventually reveal themselves. The young couple beside the refrigerator nodded sympathetically. "That's hard," the wife said. Chloe gave a tiny shrug designed to look humble. "She chose her career, we respect that. But at some point you stop waiting for people to come home." That one landed cleaner than the others, probably rehearsed. Meanwhile, I was standing less than 15 feet away, wearing boots still stained from deployment dust. Funny world. Eleanor stepped smoothly into the conversation before anybody could ask follow-up questions. She's always been very independent, my mother said warmly. Warmly. That part almost impressed me. Some people lie aggressively. Eleanor lied like she was frosting a cake. She was overseas most holidays, she continued. And after Arthur passed, she paused delicately. Well, families change. Families change. That's one way to describe forging ahead with the sale of somebody else's property. The buyer glanced around the kitchen. So this belonged to your father? My father-in-law, Eleanor corrected gently. Thomas and I have basically maintained the property ourselves for years. I nearly laughed out loud. Thomas Vance once paid a handyman $245 to replace a toilet handle because he claimed plumbing required specialized expertise. Arthur maintained that house until arthritis physically stopped him. My mother maintained appearances, different skill sets entirely. Julian stepped closer, holding a folder against his chest. The transition process has actually been remarkably smooth, he said confidently. The family handled everything proactively. Of course he thought that. From his perspective, this was just another upscale Sermsbound sale, with emotionally constipated relatives and tasteful granite countertops. He had no idea he was tap dancing through a legal minefield in Italian loafers. Eleanor adjusted her pearl necklace lightly before speaking again. We wanted to avoid unnecessary delays around the holidays. That sentence was for Julian, not the buyers. I noticed immediately, and so did he. He lowered his voice slightly. Speaking of paperwork, we should still review the final title signatures before tomorrow morning, just to keep escrow clean. There it was. A flicker. Tiny, but real. For the first time all morning, my mother's smile tightened at the corners. Not much, just enough. Then she recovered instantly. Oh, of course, she said smoothly. But everything's already been expedited through the family trust. Family trust. Interesting improvisation. Because no such trust existed. Arthur hated trusts. Called them rich people treasure maps. Julian nodded professionally. And the remaining signature issue? Purely ceremonial, Eleanor replied without hesitation. Ceremonial. I looked down at my coffee cup to hide the expression threatening my face. Somewhere deep inside me, anger finally stirred awake. Not explosive anger, not dramatic movie rage. Something colder. The kind that settles into your spine when you realize somebody looked directly at the truth and decided lying felt easier. Grant suddenly joined the conversation, eager in the way financially desperate men often become around expensive transactions. We're honestly just trying to simplify things for everybody, he said. Simplify. That was rich coming from a man leasing a BMW he clearly couldn't afford. I remembered Chloe posting honeymoon photos from St. Lucia 6 months earlier. Private cabanas. Oceanfront dining. Matching spa robes embroidered with their initials like they were European royalty instead of two people financing scented candles on credit cards. Now they needed $845,000 to simplify. America should really stop pretending math isn't emotional. A buyer wandered toward the staircase while Eleanor turned quietly toward Julian. We're all set for tomorrow at 9, correct? Assuming the title confirmation clears today, yes. It will, she said immediately. Too fast. That's when I knew something else. She wasn't just hoping this worked. She already convinced herself it was morally justified. That realization changed everything for me. Because ordinary guilt leaves cracks, hesitation, regret. Eleanor had none. In her mind, she wasn't stealing from her daughter. She was rescuing Chloe, saving appearances, protecting the family image. My family service overseas had simply become useful timing. That's the dangerous thing about self-righteous people. They can turn cruelty into responsibility if you give them enough social pressure and expensive zip codes. I leaned one shoulder lightly against the counter and finally looked directly at my mother for the first time all morning. She didn't recognize me immediately, not out of blindness, out of expectation. She wasn't expecting me to exist inside this room yet. Then her eyes paused, just briefly. A flicker of confusion crossed her face before she looked away again toward Julian. Interesting. Even standing 10 feet away, I still didn't fit the version of reality she'd constructed. The buyers continued wandering through the house while Christmas music drifted faintly from hidden speakers somewhere near the hallway, silver bells. Of course. Nothing says family betrayal like instrumental holiday jazz and illegal property transfers. I checked my watch quietly. 8:54 a.m. Snow kept falling outside beyond the kitchen windows, steady, quiet. And while my mother continued smiling through carefully rehearsed lies, my heartbeat stayed calm and even beneath the gray sweater. 60 beats per minute. Same as qualifying range training. Because truth doesn't panic. Truth just waits for paperwork. I ironed my Class A uniform at 5:40 that morning inside a motel room that still smelled faintly like burned dust and stale coffee. The heater clicked every 30 seconds, like it was reconsidering its life choices. Outside, fresh snow covered the parking lot in smooth white layers while a man in pants scraped ice off a Honda Civic using what looked suspiciously like a soup ladle. Christmas Eve in Illinois. Beautiful place. I buttoned the jacket slowly and checked the gold lieutenant bars under the bathroom light. Clean, centered, sharp enough to reflect. Arthur used to say uniforms mattered because they reminded people you belonged somewhere before they tried making you feel small. At the time, I thought he sounded dramatic. Turns out, old men earn drama honestly. The manila folder sat on the motel desk beside my coffee cup. Inside it, the original survivorship deed, county verification printouts, tax records, Arthur's death certificate, and 3 pages of documents proving Eleanor Vance had exactly 0 legal authority to sell that house. Light reading for the holidays. By 8:41, I was standing across the streets from Hayes Luxury Residential Group, watching employees carry pastry boxes through the front entrance. The building looked exactly how you'd expect a suburban real estate office to look. Expensive glass, tasteful brick, artificial wreaths professionally attached by people who definitely charged too much. A giant banner across the lobby window read, "Where your next chapter begins." That felt unintentionally threatening. I crossed the street carefully through slush and pushed through the front doors at exactly 8:57. The receptionist looked up immediately. Her smile arrived automatically, then faltered halfway. Most people react strangely to military dress uniforms in civilian spaces, like you accidentally brought accountability into a room designed for networking. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here for the Sycamore closing." "Oh," she blinked quickly. "Of course, conference room B." I thanked her and walked down the hallway without hurrying. The polished floor reflected overhead lights beneath my shoes. Somewhere nearby, a printer jammed aggressively while somebody whispered about wire transfers. Normal office sounds. Normal morning. That was the strange part. The world keeps functioning even while somebody's life cracks open. I reached the frosted glass conference door and paused. Voices inside. Chloe laughing. My mother saying something about Napa Valley. Thomas coughing quietly, the way he always did before uncomfortable conversations. Then Julian Hayes speaking in his polished realtor cadence. "Well, congratulations again. Assuming signatures go through this morning, we should fund escrow before noon." Escrow. Such a clean word for something this ugly. I opened the door. The heavy glass clicked softly against the stopper. Every voice stopped immediately. There they were. Eleanor seated at the mahogany conference table in cream wool and pearls like suburban royalty preparing for coronation. Chloe beside her scrolling through her phone with one manicured finger. Grant nervously tapping a Mont Blanc pen against the table. Thomas staring into a paper coffee cup like answers lived somewhere near the bottom. And Julian Hayes at the head of the table holding closing documents. For half a second, nobody moved. Then Chloe's face drained completely white. Honestly, it was the first authentic expression I'd seen from her all week. "Harper?" she whispered. I closed the door behind me carefully. No dramatic slam, no yelling, no movie speech. The room already knew what I was, a problem. Julian recovered first because sales professionals survive emotionally by pretending every disaster is manageable. "Lieutenant Vance," he said cautiously, glancing between us. "I wasn't aware you'd returned. That seems to be a recurring theme lately." Nobody laughed. Good. I walked toward the table slowly while snow drifted outside the conference room windows behind me. My mother finally found her voice. "Harper, sweetheart, don't. Not loud, just precise." That stopped her immediately. I set the manila folder on the polished table surface beside the escrow documents. The sound echoed sharper than expected inside the silent room. Grant stopped tapping the pen. Thomas still wouldn't look at me. Some habits survive every crisis. Julian straightened slightly. "I'm sure whatever misunderstanding exists here, there isn't one." I opened the folder and removed the original deed carefully. Even Julian's expression changed when he saw the county seal. Real paper has weight to it. Seriousness. especially compared to the cheerful stack of unsigned closing forms sitting beside his elbow. I slid the deed directly across the table toward him, not Eleanor, him. Because unlike my family, Julian actually cared about legality. His fingers touched the document cautiously. Then his eyes started moving, fast at first, then slower, then very slow. The room stayed silent except for the faint hum of recessed lighting overhead. Chloe looked at my mother. My mother looked at Julian. Thomas looked like a man calculating how expensive divorce might become at 61. Finally, Julian cleared his throat. "Excuse," he said quietly. He read the page again, then again. The professionalism drained out of his face one line at a time. I watched the exact moment the math broke apart inside his head. Arthur Vance Sr., joint tenancy, rights of survivorship, Harper Lynn Vance, sole surviving owner, no trust, no transferable authority, no valid sale, nothing. The entire transaction collapsed right there between catered pastries and overpriced fountain pens. Julian looked up slowly. "Mrs. Vance?" he began carefully. Eleanor forced a smile so strained it almost looked painful. "Yes? You told me the property was held under family trust authority." Silence. A dangerous kind. The kind where everybody suddenly hears their own breathing. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace with trembling fingers. "Well, technically, there is no trust," I said calmly. Julian turned another page rapidly. "This deed was never disclosed during title review." "No," I replied. "Because I was deployed overseas while my family attempted to sell my house." The word "my" landed hard. Grant leaned backward immediately, like physical distance might somehow protect him legally. Smartest decision he'd made all year. Chloe finally snapped first. "Oh my God, Harper, can we not do this here?" Interesting choice of wording. Not, "we're sorry." Not, "this is a misunderstanding." Just, "can we not embarrass ourselves publicly?" Priorities. I looked directly at her. "You staged Grandpa's house while I was in Kuwait. That's not fair. You told buyers I abandoned the family." Her mouth opened, closed again. No response. Because lies sound flimsier once the missing person walks into the room wearing medals. Julian slowly removed his glasses and rubbed one hand across his face. That reaction told me everything. He wasn't angry yet. He was terrified. Real estate brokers fear lawsuits the way sailors fear lightning. My mother suddenly leaned forward. "Harper, we were trying to help Chloe." There it was, the justification. Not regret, not guilt. Moral permission. I studied her face for a long moment while snow continued falling behind the conference room windows. Then I looked down at the untouched stack of closing paperwork sitting beside the original deed. $845,000 of betrayal reduced to useless paper in under 60 seconds. Amazing how fast fraud collapses once truth physically enters the room. And standing there in Arthur's granddaughter's uniform, watching my family finally realize the house was never theirs to sell, I felt something unexpected. Not victory, just gravity. Like reality, finally arrived to collect debt. The silence after my last sentence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Not long in normal life. An eternity inside a closing room. Julian Hayes lowered himself slowly into his chair, like his knees suddenly stopped trusting him. The man looked 10 years older than he had 5 minutes earlier. He picked up the deed again. I could practically hear the legal liability calculations happening behind his eyes. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Under Illinois joint tenancy law," he said carefully, "ownership transferred automatically upon Arthur Vance Sr.'s death to Lieutenant Harper Vance as surviving joint tenant." Nobody moved. Julian swallowed once before continuing. "That means the property cannot legally be sold without her authorization." Then came the final line. "The sole legal owner of the property is Harper Vance." Out loud, the truth sounded strangely simple. No screaming courtroom twist. No dramatic music. Just paperwork. Arthur would have appreciated that. Chloe stared at me like I'd personally set fire to Christmas. Grant looked ready to fake his own death and move to Arizona under a different name. And my mother broke. Not gracefully, not quietly. The tears arrived instantly, fast and theatrical, sliding down her makeup while she pressed one hand dramatically against her chest. "Oh my God," she gasped. "Harper, how could you do this to your own family?" There it was. Not, "how could we do this to you?" Amazing difference. Julian looked deeply uncomfortable. The receptionist outside the conference room glanced through the glass once before immediately deciding she wanted absolutely no part of this situation. Smart woman. Eleanor turned toward me fully now, voice shaking harder. "You have no idea what Chloe's been going through." Chloe sniffed loudly beside her on cue. Honestly, if they weren't trying to steal my house, I might have admired the teamwork. Grant lost 2 major clients this year, my mother continued breathlessly. Their mortgage payments are impossible right now. Grant suddenly became fascinated by the table surface. Probably because hearing your financial collapse discussed like a hostage negotiation in front of strangers tends to humble a man. We were trying to save them, Eleanor said. There it was again. Save. Like this had all been noble. Like fraud wrapped in family language somehow transformed into sacrifice. I stood quietly beside the table while my mother cried harder. A good sister would help, she whispered. Interesting. Because 6 weeks earlier, a good sister apparently also meant telling buyers I abandoned the family. The standards seemed flexible depending on who needed money. Julian removed his glasses again. Mrs. Vance, he interrupted carefully. I really think we should pause this conversation until legal counsel. No. Eleanor snapped toward him with surprising sharpness. This is a family matter. The irony almost knocked me unconscious. A family matter. That phrase usually appears right before somebody tries emotionally blackmailing relatives into financing bad decisions. Thomas finally looked up for the first time since I entered the room. He looked exhausted. Not guilty, exactly. Just worn down in the specific way men become after spending decades avoiding conflict until conflict grows teeth. Harper, he said quietly. His voice cracked a little. We can still fix this. I waited. He rubbed both palms nervously against his slacks. Just sign the paperwork, he murmured. Please, we'll figure something out afterward. I stared at him, not because I didn't understand, because I did. Thomas Vance spent his whole life worshiping peace at the expense of honesty. Every uncomfortable truth in our family eventually got buried under phrases like, let's not make this worse, and everybody's stressed right now. Peace became his religion, and like most religions built on fear, it demanded sacrifice from other people first. You want me to sign over my house, I said calmly, to avoid embarrassment. His eyes dropped immediately. That answered itself. Chloe suddenly pushed back from the table hard enough to rattle the water glasses. Oh my God, you always do this. I blinked once. Do what? This superiority thing? Her face flushed red now. You disappear for months. Come back acting morally better than everybody because you joined the military. You tried selling my property. We needed help. The room snapped silent again. Not because she yelled. Because she finally said the honest part out loud. Need. Not family legacy, not emotional healing, money. Chloe's breathing turned shaky while mascara darkened beneath her eyes. You don't understand what it's like being married to somebody under that kind of pressure. Grant looked absolutely devastated hearing himself described like an overdue utility bill. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Eleanor grabbed Chloe's hand dramatically. We were trying to protect her future. I looked at the two of them, sitting there in coordinated winter outfits beside illegal paperwork and untouched pastries. Then I thought about the motel room, the dark house, the missing mailbox. The fact that they fully intended for me to land from an 11-month deployment with nowhere to go 2 days before Christmas. And strangely, the anger disappeared completely, not because they deserved forgiveness, because exhaustion finally outweighed outrage. I suddenly saw them clearly. My mother, terrified of social embarrassment more than moral failure. Chloe, confusing luxury with stability because she never learned the difference. Thomas, hoping silence could survive consequences forever. They weren't masterminds. They were emotionally hungry people using money as medication. That realization felt heavier than betrayal. Julian carefully closed the file folder in front of him. I'm terminating this transaction immediately, he said. Nobody argued. Even Eleanor understood the performance was collapsing now. The image cracked beyond repair. My mother looked back at me desperately. So that's it? She whispered. You're really willing to humiliate your own family over a house? A house, funny. Arthur spent 40 years building a home, while Eleanor reduced it to a financial object in one sentence. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. No, I said quietly. This happened long before the house. Tears kept sliding down her face. You're being cruel. That one almost hurt. Because somewhere deep down, she probably believed it. People who rewrite reality long enough eventually become loyal to the fiction. I picked up the manila folder from the table slowly. Then I looked directly at my father. You asked me to keep the peace. Thomas nodded weakly. I adjusted the folder under one arm. I spent 11 months sleeping beside blast walls and flood wreckage overseas. My voice stayed calm. I can survive conflict. Nobody spoke. Outside the conference room window, Snow drifted steadily across the parking lot while employees in holiday sweaters pretended not to watch us. Then I looked back at my mother one final time, and for the first time since landing in Chicago, I felt something softer than anger. Pity. Deep, tired, human pity. Because these people loved appearances so much they were willing to sacrifice anyone who threatened them. Even me, especially me. I held her gaze and spoke quietly enough that nobody in the hallway could hear. I cannot afford your kind of love. The brokerage receptionist avoided eye contact while security quietly escorted my family toward the front entrance. Nobody resisted. That was the strange part. After all the lies, all the manipulation, all the performance, the ending arrived quietly. No overturned tables, no screaming. Just the dull administrative collapse of people discovering reality still applies to them. Chloe walked fastest, head down, arms folded tightly across her coat. Grant followed 2 steps behind, carrying both their phones because apparently emotional support now came with charging cables. My mother kept trying to speak through tears. This didn't need to happen like this. Nobody answered her, not even Thomas. He moved slowly near the back of the group, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Shoulders rounded forward, tie loosened unevenly near his collar. For one brief second, I almost walked after him. Almost. Then I remembered standing in the snow outside a dark house with nowhere to go. That thing settled the matter. Julian Hayes remained inside the conference room, staring at the DD paperwork like it personally insulted his profession. I'm going to have to report this to title compliance, he muttered finally. Probably. He winced slightly. I genuinely didn't know. I know. That seemed to bother him more somehow. People handle anger better than mercy. Anger gives them something to fight. Mercy forces them to sit still with themselves. Julian rubbed one hand over his jaw. For what it's worth, he said carefully. Your grandfather protected this property intelligently. I looked down at the folder in my hands. Yeah, I replied quietly. He usually did. The snow had picked up by the time I walked back outside. Heavy flakes now. The kind that soften sound across entire neighborhoods. I stood beside my truck for a minute, watching Sycamore Street traffic move slowly through the intersection ahead. Brake lights glowed red against the gray afternoon, while Christmas music drifted faintly from a nearby coffee shop patio. Normal life continued everywhere. That still amazed me. Somewhere people were buying wrapping paper, burning cookies, arguing about airport pickups. Meanwhile, my family had detonated itself over real estate and social status before lunch. Holiday spirit comes in many forms. The drive back to the house felt shorter this time. Maybe because uncertainty was gone. Pain exhausts people, but uncertainty drains them hollow. At least now I understood exactly where everybody stood. Oakbrook looked almost peaceful beneath the snowfall. Kids in oversized gloves dragged sleds across frozen lawns, while somebody down the block struggled heroically with Christmas lights and a ladder that clearly violated several safety regulations. Arthur Wood helped him, then insulted the wiring choices for 20 minutes afterward. I parked in front of the house just before 1:30. The pending sale sign was already gone, probably removed quickly once lawyers started using words like liability. Good call. I stepped out into knee-deep snow carrying the duffel bag over one shoulder. For the first time since returning home, the house no longer looked unfamiliar. Empty, yes, wounded maybe, but mine. The front door key still worked. That almost broke me. After everything else, some small part of me expected rejection even from the lock itself. The house creaked, soft enough when I stepped inside. Cold air lingered through the hallways because the thermostat had been lowered during staging. I closed the door behind me and stood there quietly. No music, no fake vanilla scent, no buyers wandering around discussing granite countertops like they were evaluating livestock. Just silence, real silence. The kind houses have after people stop pretending inside them. My boots echoed lightly across the hardwood floor, while afternoon light faded through the front windows. Most of Arthur's furniture was still gone, probably locked inside some temporary storage unit, waiting for a sale that would never happen. I hoped they at least wrapped the oak table properly. Otherwise, somebody was going to hear from me in language not approved by Army regulations. The living room looked especially hollow now, without the staging company decorations glowing under artificial lights. Plastic garland still hung across the mantel. Decorative lanterns sat beside fake pine branches dusted with glitter. Nobody who actually chops wood decorates like this. I set the duffel bag down beside the fireplace and started removing things slowly. Plastic candles first. Then the fake garland. Then a ceramic reindeer wearing a scarf for reasons nobody could adequately explain. I stacked everything neatly near the wall instead of throwing it away. Arthur believed disrespecting objects turned people careless over time. Besides, some underpaid staging employee would probably need all this back by Monday. Once the mantel sat empty again, the room changed immediately. Cleaner somehow. Honest. I knelt beside the duffel bag and unzipped the lower compartment carefully. The brass compass rested exactly where I left it, wrapped inside the folded deed. Heavy. Cold. Certain. I carried it to the fireplace and placed it directly in the center of the stone hearth. Not dramatic, not ceremonial, just right. The brass surface caught the fading winter light from the front window while snow drifted quietly outside. North. Always north. I sat down on the floor beside the fireplace after that, because the house still had no proper furniture left downstairs. The hardwood felt cold through my jeans. I didn't mind. For a while I just listened. Pipes ticking softly inside the walls, wind brushing snow against the windows, a distant snowblower somewhere across the neighborhood. Home sounds, real ones. And sitting there alone in the quiet house Arthur built with his own hands, I finally understood something that took me 31 years to learn. Dignity is expensive. Not financially. Emotionally. Because protecting it usually costs you relationships with people who benefited from you having none. That was the part nobody teaches you. People say family is everything. But sometimes family becomes a negotiation where love gets exchanged for obedience, silence, money, appearances. Arthur knew that before I did. That's why he gave me the deed, not to make me rich. To make sure I never had to beg for permission to exist inside my own life. The house stayed cold around me while daylight slowly disappeared beyond the windows. But underneath the silence, underneath the missing furniture and scraped walls and betrayal, the foundation still held, and so did I. I spent the first 2 weeks back in the house wearing work gloves more often than winter gloves. That felt healthier somehow. The staging company came 3 days after Christmas to collect their furniture. 2 exhausted guys loaded fake plants and decorative lanterns into a truck while apologizing every 30 seconds, like they personally caused my family collapse. It's okay, I told them. Honestly, they were the least dishonest people involved in the entire situation. Once the house emptied out again, I started bringing Arthur's things back from storage one piece at a time. The oak dining table came first. That required 4 men, 1 rented trailer, and a 20-minute argument with a guy named Rick, who insisted the table probably wasn't solid wood anyway. Rick also believed Yellowstone was filmed in Montana entirely because that's where the horses live. So I ignored him. The table still carried the scratch near the corner from when I dropped a bowling trophy on it at 15 after pretending I wasn't crying over a breakup. Arthur saw the dent and said, "Good, now it looks expensive." I ran my hand across that same scratch while the movers lowered the table back into the dining room where it belonged. Home is weird like that. Sometimes healing looks very emotional in movies. Long speeches, crying in kitchens, inspirational music. Real healing usually looks like tightening loose screws while eating cold takeout over paperwork. I fixed cabinet hinges, replaced cracked weather stripping, reorganized Arthur's garage. One afternoon, I found 3 unopened boxes labeled important cords. Every box contained random extension cables that connected to absolutely nothing. Classic Arthur. The house slowly started sounding alive again after that. Floorboards settling, pipes warming properly. Coffee brewing before sunrise, instead of silence swallowing the rooms whole. And somewhere during all of it, I realized something uncomfortable about myself. I'd spent most of my life believing keeping peace made me mature. It didn't. It made me easy to use. That's a hard sentence to admit out loud. Especially for people raised inside families where love constantly arrives attached to conditions. Don't upset your mother. Be understanding. Your sister's struggling. You know how your father is. Just let it go. Funny how letting it go almost always benefits the person causing damage. I think a lot of people watching this probably understand exactly what I mean. Some families quietly assign roles without ever saying it directly. One child becomes the responsible one becomes the fragile one becomes the peacekeeper, and after enough years, everybody starts treating those roles like permanent law. I became useful because I was dependable. That sounds flattering until you realize dependable people often get treated like emotional infrastructure. Everybody assumes you will absorb pressure quietly because you always have before. The more capable you are, the less sympathy people think you need. That lesson cost me almost everything before I finally understood it. A week after New Year's, old Mr. Donnelly from across the street knocked on my door carrying a snow shovel and a container of beef stew his wife made. Neither of us mentioned the real reason he came over at first. Midwestern people would rather fight bears than discuss emotions directly. He stood in the kitchen awkwardly while I reheated coffee. Finally, he sighed. "Your grandfather worried about you?" I looked up from the mugs. "What do you mean, mister?" Donnelly shifted uncomfortably. "He thought someday your family would expect you to carry things nobody else wanted to carry." That landed hard because it was true. Arthur saw it years before I did. Not because he loved me more than the others, because he paid attention. There's a difference. Mr. Donnelly stirred too much sugar into his coffee while avoiding eye contact. He used to say you were the only person in that family who understood the difference between value and price. That one stayed with me for days, because my mother and Chloe honestly believed this entire disaster was about a house. It wasn't. The house was just collateral damage. The real issue was entitlement. People get very comfortable spending your emotional energy when they assume you'll never stop providing it. That applies to money too, which brings me to something I genuinely want people listening to understand. Protect your paperwork. I'm serious. Keep copies of property, documents. Understand inheritance laws. Read what you sign. Don't hand legal control to relatives simply because confronting them feels uncomfortable. Discomfort passes. Financial destruction lingers. And please stop confusing guilt with responsibility. That lesson alone could save people years of damage. If someone only contacts you when they need rescuing, silence, money, forgiveness, or access to your stability, that isn't closeness. That's dependency wearing family language like a disguise. Real love does not require you to disappear so somebody else can stay comfortable. Arthur understood that. That's why he gave me the deed quietly instead of announcing it at Thanksgiving dinner, beside dry turkey and passive-aggressive wine comments. He knew protection works better when it's practical. By February, the house finally felt like mine again instead of a crime scene with crown molding. The compass still sat in the center of the fireplace hearth. Every morning before work, I saw it there while drinking coffee in the quiet living room. North, steady, simple. And honestly, after everything that happened, I think that old brass compass represented something bigger than direction. It represented limits. A line. Proof that even love needs boundaries or eventually somebody turns it into ownership. Arthur didn't leave me a perfect family. He left me permission to stop shrinking myself to keep one functioning. That turned out to be worth a lot more than $845,000. The first text from my mother arrived 73 days after the brokerage disaster. Not an apology. Of course not. It came at 9:14 p.m. on a Thursday while I was sitting on the living room floor, assembling a replacement hinge for one of Arthur's garage cabinets. "Hope you're doing well. Your father's blood pressure has been very high lately." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then came the second text. "I just hate what this family has become." Interesting sentence. Because people like my mother always describe destruction like weather. Something that mysteriously arrives, instead of something they personally carried into the room wearing pearls. I didn't answer. Not out of revenge, out of exhaustion. That's something people rarely talk about after family betrayal. The tiredness. Not dramatic sadness, not constant anger. Just emotional fatigue from realizing every interaction now requires legal-level caution. A week later, Chloe called. Actually called. That almost made me crash my grocery cart into a pyramid of canned soup at Jewel-Osco. I watched the phone vibrate in my hand while an elderly man nearby argued with his wife about discounted peaches like civilization depended on it. Normal life again. Strange feeling. I answered on the fourth ring. "Hello?" Silence. Then Chloe exhaled sharply. "So we're really doing this?" Still no apology. Consistency matters. I pushed the cart slowly toward frozen foods. "I don't know what that means." "You know exactly what it means." "No, actually, I don't." She got quiet after that. For a second, I almost heard the old version of my sister underneath the resentment. The teenager who used to steal fries off my plate and cry during dog movies. Then it disappeared again. "You embarrassed us," she said finally. "There it was. Not, you hurt us. Not, we hurt you." Embarrassment. That remained the central tragedy in their minds. I stopped beside the freezer section and grabbed a bag of hash browns while she kept talking. "Do you have any idea what people in Oak Brook are saying about Mom?" I looked down at the nutritional label. Honestly, Americans put sugar in everything. Yes, I said calmly. Probably the truth for once. She inhaled sharply. You've changed. That one almost made me laugh. Because I hadn't changed. I'd just stopped cooperating. There's a difference. Chloe, I said quietly, you tried to sell my house while I was deployed. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. How was it supposed to happen? No answer, just breathing. Then the familiar pivot arrived. You always make everything sound so black and white. Another interesting pattern toxic families use. When accountability appears, suddenly morality becomes complicated. I leaned against the shopping cart handle. No, I replied. Ownership paperwork is black and white. That's why contracts exist. She muttered something under her breath. Probably not festive. Before hanging up, she said one final thing that stayed with me longer than I expected. You know, Grandpa would have hated this. I stood there for a second listening to the dead line after she disconnected. Then I picked up 2 frozen pizzas and went home. Because here's the uncomfortable truth nobody tells you. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most still know exactly which emotional buttons to press. That doesn't mean they're right. It means they know you well. Arthur Wood hated conflict, yes, but he hated dishonesty more. That's why he protected the house legally instead of emotionally. He understood something most people refuse to admit. When money enters family dynamics, love alone becomes unreliable. A month later, I ran into Julian Hayes at a hardware store. Of course, that's how suburban America works. Everybody eventually meets near power tools. He spotted me near the paint section and visibly considered pretending not to. Then professionalism won. Lieutenant Vance. Julian. The poor man still looked mildly traumatized. We stood there awkwardly between wood stain samples while a toddler nearby attempted to lick a shopping cart handle with dangerous confidence. Julian cleared his throat. I wanted to apologize again for not catching the title issue sooner. You didn't know. Still. He shifted uncomfortably. That situation became educational. Educational. That's one word for attempted real estate fraud during Christmas week. He glanced at me carefully. For what it's worth, your grandfather had a reputation around town. Oh yeah? Julian nodded. People said he was difficult. I smiled for the first time all day. That means he had boundaries. Julian laughed unexpectedly hard at that. Then he lowered his voice slightly. You know, most people in your position would have sold the house afterward anyway. Probably. But you stayed. I looked down at the Spul paint cards in my hand. Warm stone beige, winter pine, ironwood gray. Every suburban color sounded like a retired detective novel. It mattered to him, I said finally. Julian studied me quietly for a second. No, he replied. I think it matters to you. That hit harder than expected. Because for months, I'd framed everything as protecting Arthur's memory, his work, his values. But somewhere along the way, the house stopped feeling like inherited responsibility and started feeling like proof. Proof I could exist without asking permission. That realization changed me more than the betrayal itself. I think a lot of people spend years trapped inside relationships where they confuse access with love. If someone demands unlimited access to your time, money, emotional energy, forgiveness, privacy, or peace while offering guilt in return, that's not closeness. That's consumption. Healthy love respects locked doors, it respects hesitation, it respects ownership, it respects the word no. And people who truly care about you do not panic when boundaries appear. Only people benefiting from your lack of boundaries panic. That lesson cost me almost my home before I finally understood it. A few nights later, snow started falling again over Sycamore Street while I sat beside the fireplace drinking coffee from Arthur's old White Sox mug. The brass compass still rested in the center of the hearth, steady as always. Outside, Christmas lights glowed across neighboring houses while wind brushed softly against the windows. And for the first time in my life, being alone inside that house didn't feel lonely. It felt safe. I stopped answering unknown numbers after March, not because I was hiding, because apparently half my extended family suddenly discovered my existence once the Oakbrook story started spreading through church parking lots and neighborhood wine nights. Funny how relatives never call during deployments, but suddenly become historians once property values enter the conversation. One aunt left me a voicemail that lasted 4 minutes and somehow contained both Bible verses and passive-aggressive criticism about modern women. Impressive range, honestly. Another cousin texted, "Families should stay private." That came from a man arrested in 2017 for fighting somebody outside a Buffalo Wild Wings. Privacy clearly meant different things to different people. I ignored most of it, not out of cruelty, out of pattern recognition. That became one of the biggest changes in my life after everything happened. I started paying attention to patterns instead of excuses. That sounds simple until you actually do it. Patterns tell the truth people spend years talking around. Who only contacts you during emergencies? Who disappears once accountability arrives? Who demands understanding but never offers it? Who treats your boundaries like personal attacks? Patterns remove confusion fast. One Saturday morning in early April, I found myself repainting the back fence while Arthur's old radio played classic rock loud enough to annoy neighboring zip codes. The fence didn't technically need repainting, but grief makes people weirdly productive sometimes. Halfway through the second panel, my father's truck pulled into the driveway. I saw it through the fence slats before he even stepped out. Thomas climbed down slowly, wearing the same brown jacket he'd owned since roughly the Nixon administration. He stood there awkwardly with both hands shoved into his pockets while cold wind moved through the yard. Neither of us spoke right away. Finally, he nodded toward the fence. "Looks good. Thanks." Another silence. Midwestern men could turn emotional avoidance into an Olympic sport. He walked closer carefully, like I might spook and run into traffic. "I brought some things," he said quietly. From the truck bed, he lifted Arthur's old toolbox, the real one. Red metal, scratches everywhere. One broke latch Arthur refused to replace because he claimed the box still understands loyalty. I stared at it for a long second. I thought Mom sold that. Thomas looked embarrassed. She tried. That tracked. He set the toolbox down near the garage. I kept it in storage. There was something painfully honest about the way he said it, like a man confessing to saving photographs from a house fire. I wiped paint from my gloves onto a rag. "Why are you here?" That question visibly hurt him. Good. Not because I wanted revenge. Because honest questions should hurt when people spend years avoiding them. Thomas looked down at the grass. "Your mother thinks you hate us." I leaned against the fence post. "No," I said calmly. "I think you chose appearances over me." He didn't deny it. That mattered. Most people never get that far. Wind rattled the bare tree branches overhead while somebody down the block tested a lawnmower far too early in the season. Finally, Thomas sighed heavily. "Things got out of hand?" "No," I replied quietly. "Things got revealed." That landed. I could see it in his face. The exhaustion, the shame, the realization that silence stops protecting people once consequences arrive. For years, my father survived conflict by minimizing everything. "Your mother didn't mean it that way. Chloe's under stress. Let's not make this bigger." Families fight sometimes. But here's the problem with constantly shrinking reality to keep peace. Eventually, you lose the ability to recognize how serious something actually is. Thomas genuinely believed this situation became tragic when lawyers got involved, not when they left me homeless. That difference explained my entire childhood. He sat heavily on the porch steps while I kept painting. "I should have stopped it," he admitted eventually. The words came out rough, like they physically scraped his throat on the way up. I kept working quietly, not because I didn't care, because apologies arrive too late sometimes. And when they do, people want immediate emotional closure to ease their guilt. Life doesn't work that fast. "I kept thinking your mother would calm down," he continued. "Then Chloe started panicking about money, and nobody worried about me." He looked away immediately. There it was, the real truth sitting naked in daylight. Not evil, not hatred, just hierarchy. My pain ranked lower than their comfort. That realization changes a person permanently. I dipped the brush back into paint slowly. "You know what the worst part was?" Thomas rubbed both hands together against the cold. "What?" "I would have helped if you asked honestly." That one broke him a little. I saw it happen in real time. Because it was true. If my mother called me months earlier and said Chloe was drowning financially, I probably would found some way to help. Maybe not with the house, but something. Instead, they chose deception because deception gave them control. That's another lesson people learn too late. Manipulation usually begins where honesty risks rejection. Thomas stared out across the yard for a long time before speaking again. "Your grandfather used to say something about you." I waited. "He said you were the only person in the family strong enough to leave." That hit differently coming from him. Not because it sounded flattering, because it sounded lonely. The radio crackled softly beside the garage while wind carried fresh paint fumes through the yard. Thomas stood slowly after a while and brushed dirt from his jeans. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. Smartest thing he'd said in years. Then he hesitated beside the truck. But your mother? He swallowed hard. She still thinks this can go back to normal someday. I looked toward the house, toward Arthur's workshop windows, the repaired fence, the chimney smoke drifting lightly into gray spring air. Then I looked back at my father. Normal is what caused this. He nodded once, like a man, finally understanding a language too late to use it properly. After he drove away, I carried Arthur's toolbox inside and set it beside the fireplace under the brass compass. 2 objects, both heavy, both built to survive pressure. And standing there in the quiet house again, I realized something that might help somebody listening to this right now. Keeping peace and keeping dignity are not always the same thing. Sometimes the price of peace is your self-respect, and that is always too expensive.